Buongiorno guys! I hope you are doing well today because it's a big topic. You know, here at Proj we are kind of passionate with rigging and animation, and the question we get all the time: how do I create custom shapes to make my rig easier to animate? Yes. Maybe you already know how to build a rig, place your bones, but now you want a clean, custom control that make the rig much easier and more intuitive to use, and you're not quite sure where to start. Well, in this video we are going to talk about this topic and I'm here for that. So let's get started. So we have our body here from Cuphead, and if I jump into the viewport in pose mode, you can see there are a lot of things going on. This is basically the armature I created with a bunch of logic, but right now I don't have any specific controls to easily grab and manipulate my rig. Most of the time what you want to do is create custom shapes that surround your bones. For example, around the arm, so it becomes much easier to grab and use when posing and animating your character. In Blender, we already have a lot of great add-ons that can help with this, like Rigify, Cloud Rig, and many others. But today I want to show you how to create your own custom shapes from scratch and use them on any bones of your rig. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So you need to know that everything will be located in the bone settings, inside the bone properties, under viewport display and custom shape. Before jumping into custom shapes for your rig, there are a few things you can already customize. For example, you can define colors for your bones. As you can see here, I have multiple bones, so some of them are already colored. This is because they are using an IK constraint. If I select this one and go to the bone constraint tab, you can see that it has an IK constraint, and that's why it has this specific color. But at any time, you can select any bone, go to the bone properties, and manually change the bone color. For example, if I switch it to another color, you can see that the bone immediately changes. This can be really useful when you want to visually separate certain bones from the others or highlight a specific part of your rig. You also have pose bone color options, where you can define different colors depending on your context. For example, one color can be used in pose mode, while another bone color can be displayed mainly in edit mode. You can also change the display shape of the bone itself. Sometimes this is really useful, especially when working with a lot of joints, because it can help make your viewport cleaner and avoid having too much visual clutter. It's a simple way to adjust how your bones are displayed before moving into custom shapes. So now that we have covered these basic display options, let's talk about custom shapes. If we look a bit closer at the structure I created here, you can see that when I select the bone and go into the data properties of the armature, I created a bunch of bone collections. These are basically groups that you can create using the plus icon here. In pose mode, you just need to select the bones you want and assign them to the corresponding collection. For example, I have different groups starting with the base collection, which contain the roots and the body offset bones. Then I have the body collection, which contain the pelvis, spine 1 and spine 2. Let me display the bone name so it is a bit clearer. Then I have the head collection, which is very simple, containing the head and then the tongue, the nose, ears, eyes and so on. For the limbs, let's take the example of the leg. I created the first FK chain, and for the IK setup, I added an additional bone at the end, respecting the same orientation and position as the original foot bone and the pole vector. This is required to create a proper IK setup through the bone constraint menu. This is what I showed you before, and this is also why this bone has different color. So if I select the IK control, I can move my leg using the IK setup. But as you can see, it's really difficult to select because I created this bone inside the foot and ankle area. And this is exactly where custom shapes become really important. As I mentioned, everything is located in the bone properties inside the custom shape section. Here we can define an object that will be used as our control shape. For this object of course can be a mesh, but most of the time we use curves because they are the most common solution for rig controls. Then we have a few settings to adjust the transform of his control, as well as some additional options to modify its appearance and behavior. So let's start with the roots and the body offset controls. I'm going to add all the other bones collections that I don't need for now. And I'm also going to create another collection where I will gather all the custom shapes I want to create. So let's call this collection TR Shapes. For the root control, I'm going to create a curve. Let's start with a simple circle curve. Let me display the mesh again, and you can see that my curve has been created up here. I'm going to move it down closer to the character. As you can see, the curve appears where my 3D cursor is located because I placed it there earlier. To make sure that it is perfectly centered, I can right-click, go to Snap, and choose Cursor to World Origin. Then I can select my curve, go again to Snap, and choose Selection to Cursor. With my curve selected, I can create the shape I want. I'm going to jump into Edit mode and adjust the points and their handles to create a rounded square shape. Then I will go back to Object mode, scale it a bit more, and move it slightly upward so it doesn't intersect with the ground. Once I'm happy with the shape, I press Ctrl+A to apply the transform. And this is going to be my first custom shape. Let's create another one. I'm going to press Shift+A, create another curve circle, move it up, and scale it down a bit. Now, let's assign these shapes to our rig. First, I select my armature and switch to pose mode. I'm going to start with the root bone, which is the main control driving the entire character. In the bone properties, under Viewport Display and Custom Shape, I can now select the shape I want to use. So here, let's pick the shape we created earlier. You can now see that my bone has changed. If you look closely, the root bone is still there, but its display has been replaced by the curve shape I created inside the CR Shapes collection. If I had the CR Shapes collection, as you can see, the original curve disappeared from the viewports, but the control shapes remain visible. This is because Blender is now using this curve as a custom display shape for the bone. By default, the rotation might not be correct. This happened because Blender bones are oriented along the y-axis, so depending on how you create your curve, you might need to adjust its rotation. You can either prepare the rotation before assigning the shape, or you can simply adjust it directly from the custom shape settings. For example, I can modify the translation and rotation values. I know this control needs to be rotated along the y-axis, so I can simply add a 90 degrees rotation, and the shape is correctly aligned. Now I can do the same thing for the body offset control. I'm going to disable the bone names to make things cleaner. Under the bone properties, in the custom shape section, I select the second shape I created, which is the circle. And now, just like before, I can manipulate my rig directly through this custom shape instead of selecting the actual bones. So you can have a bunch of shapes inside the specific collection like I did here. Be careful, make sure to rename them properly, so it's easier to understand which shapes are you selecting. For example, this one could be called rounded square, and this one could be circle. You can also offset their positions when creating them, so they don't overlap with the existing shapes. But you want to pay attention to the origin point of the created shapes because this will affect how they are displayed and transformed when assigned to your bones. Now I can continue using just a circle shape. I'm going to hide the collection here and go back into pose mode. So now let's display the body collection again. As you can see, I have the pelvis, spline 1 and spline 2 bones. Let's assign custom shapes to these controls. I will start with the pelvis. I can display the bone name again to make it easier to identify them. Here we have the pelvis, spline 1 and spline 2. I'll select the pelvis bone, go back into the bone properties, and under custom shape, I can select the circle shape. Here I need a bit more adjustments, so I can rotate it on the y-axis or the x-axis. Of course, depending on the orientation I need. I can also use the translation values to offset the shape slightly. These values are based on the local axis of the bone, which is really important to keep in mind. I can also increase the size of the shape using the scale settings. And now I have my pelvis control working with a newly created custom shape. And at any time, if I go back to my original shape, I can modify it and the changes will automatically be reflected on the custom shape used by the rig. For example, if I select the circle shape, go into Edit mode and modify the geometry, let's say by grabbing both sides and moving them upward, then hide the collection again, you can see that the control shape has been updated. The assigned custom shape is linked directly to the original object, meaning any modification you make to the source curve will automatically update all the controls using that shape. This is really powerful because you don't need to recreate or reassign your control every time. You can simply go back to your original shape, adjust it as needed, and the rig will update automatically. And lastly, the thing you want to do is add colors to your controls. As you can see, if I select my controls, I need to be in pose mode. Then, if I select my bone again, remember what we discussed earlier about the bone colors? This is where you can define the colors of your controls as well. Under the bone color section, you can choose the color you want to use. You also have pose bone color, which allows you to define a different color specifically when you are in pose mode. But in most cases, the regular bone colors will be enough. For example, I can choose a light color here, and now if I deselect the control, you can see that this control has its own custom color. However, if I go back into object mode, the color is no longer displayed. This color is only visible when working in pose mode, where you are actually manualing and animating your rig. And that's it for setting up colors on your custom controls. To continue the process, I can add another shape. For example, for the IK controls, I want to create something more like a square shape. I don't want to create this completely from scratch, so let's take another approach. I'm going to place myself here and move the cursors to this location. Then I'm going to create a new mesh, for example, a simple cube. Once created, I'm going to apply the rotation and scale to make sure the transform values are clean. Now, if I go back into the bone properties, I'm going to display my left arm IK setup. I select the IK hand control, and under the custom shape section, instead of using a curve, I can select the cube I just created. By default, Blender will display the cube exactly as it is. But what I can do is go into the custom shape setting and enable the wireframe option. This way, instead of using curves, I can use mesh object as custom shapes as well. It can even be more complex shapes if needed, and Blender will directly use it as a control display. And now I have my IK hand control working with the custom shape I wanted. And you have additional settings to further customize your controls. For example, you can adjust the wireframe thickness. If the line is too thin and difficult to see, you can simply increase the wire width to make the control more visible. You can also use the override transform option, which allows you to use another bone to drive the transform of your custom shape. This gives you more flexibility and allows you to create additional behaviors for your controls. By default, the scale to bone length option is enabled. This means that the custom shape will automatically be scaled based on the length of the bone it is assigned to. For example, this is the original size of my cube, but once it's assigned to the bone, Blender adjusts its size to match the bone length, as you can see here. Of course, you are free to disable this option and manually adjust the scale, translation, and rotation values depending on the result you want. And that's basically it. From here, we just need to continue creating and assigning the different shapes for all the controls of the rig. And a quick tip while creating all the custom control rig shapes for our body here. If you want to batch assign custom shapes to multiple bones, you can select all the bones you want in pose mode, then choose the shape you want from this menu. However, make sure to hold Alt before clicking on the shape. By doing this, you can assign the same custom shape to multiple bones at once. Regarding colors, you can assign existing color set through the various templates provided here, or create your own custom set. Each control uses 3 different colors, one for when the control is not selected, one for passive selection, and one for active selection. For batch assigning colors to multiple controls, the workflow is slightly different from assigning custom shapes. First, select all the controls you want to modify, then make sure the control with the color you want to apply is selected last. To this menu, by clicking on this icon, you can propagate the color to all the selected controls. And after spending a few minutes setting everything up, this is the final result of a cuphead body with all the custom shapes created directly in Blender. As you can see, the process is quite easy and straightforward. The goal of this tutorial was to show you the workflow without relying on any external add-on, so you can understand the fundamentals and create your own custom shapes for any type of rig. From here, you can be as creative as you want and design controls that match your workflow, your character, and your animation needs. And that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't hesitate to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I see you in 2 weeks for a new one. Ciao!